Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with the sixth part of the Bruno Spinoza reading and interpretive service. Basically, I'm providing a service to you. I'm interpreting this ancient language for you for free, providing what I hope is equivalent to a overpriced university course for you on YouTube. So, it's been a while since I've engaged with Spinoza, so I'm going to be a bit rusty. I may have to redefine some terms for myself. I may have to go back a bit. But we're going to soldier on with this whole endeavor, and we're going to dive right in to the fourth point for the proposition 8 that Spinoza has conceived of. Here. So let's dive right in. Well, you know what? We'll give a brief summary here. Proposition 8 is that every substance is necessarily infinite. So essentially what Spinoza is saying is that energy is infinite, matter is infinite, it can be reconfigured into all sorts of forms, and he's trying to prove that. So we've gone through the first three proofs in the last video in part 5, so we're going to dive right into point number 4 here. 4. This cause of existence must either be contained in the nature and definition of the thing defined, or must be postulated apart from such definition. So if you don't have a definition for a thing, you have to guess about what it is. You can only guess at its nature. You can't accurately postulate what it's going to be. And this goes back to a much earlier argument Spinoza made about the differentiation between objects and reality, that just because you understand one object doesn't mean that you can predict or somehow intuit the structure of another object that has some aspects that are similar to the thing. If it has even one difference, that one difference could mean that your prediction is completely inaccurate. And that's what I think Spinoza is trying to get at here, and what he was trying to get at in, I believe, part 3 and 4 of my video, where he mentions similar things, similar axioms. He basically says if you don't, basically he's made this argument much earlier, I believe in part 1 or 2, that no two things can be identical. And he's supporting that argument in his subsequent proofs by saying, even if you understand everything about one object, and you're comparing that one object that you think you understand everything about, and maybe you do, with a second object, if there's even one iota of difference, one little mote of difference about it, you can't predict the structure of that second object, despite however much you might understand about the first object you're comparing it to. And this ties into his argument that no two objects are exactly the same, no two individual manifestations of substance are the same, no two photons are the same. You know, within two rocks that look exactly the same on the surface, there's going to be, you know, electrons, gluons, whatever, that are keeping those substances from being identical to one another. And he goes into great lengths, Spinoza does, to prove this, because I guess he must have been assailed by critics in his time that thought that they could reduce material objects to similar, like, clones of one another. Like, oh, this rock's just a clone of the other one. Like, we don't have to pay attention to difference. It's like, you kind of do, because, you know, there really is no way to theorize that two objects are identical. It really doesn't make sense. And that truth, that proof that Spinoza spent all this time trying to advance, again, I think, and this is my theory at this point in my reading, my theory is that he's doing so in order to argue that there has to be an infinite basis for finite things to exist in the first place. Because if two things can be proven to be identical, then infinity doesn't need to exist. for identical things to exist. And what that would mean is that infinity as a concept, the concept of infinity, wouldn't need to exist. Because if two things can be identical, that means that there have been two identical generative moments of those things, that those things have existed in concurrent realities that keep them the same, right? We have to take entropy into consideration here, right? So you can't have one thing that mutates to be different. No, they're the same forever. And Spinoza is arguing, no, if there's one reality, which there is, as far as we can tell, 400 years later, if there's one reality, it means that two things that are exactly the same can't exist. If that's the case, then there needs to be an infinite base for those things to have arisen from. And despite their mutations, despite their distance from one another, even if it's the distance of a quark, there still needs to have been an infinite substrate for those things to exist. So I anticipate this is going to be a long-form proof of that, but let's read forward. If, therefore, follows that if a given number of individual things exist in nature, there must be some cause for the existence of exactly that number, neither more nor less. For example, if 20 men exist in the universe, for simplicity's sake, I will suppose them existing simultaneously, and to have had no predecessors. So 20 atoms get... the devs spawn them into existence. God, who is the dev of reality, says, I'm going to spawn 20 dudes. And we want to account for the existence of these 20 men. It will not be enough to show the cause of human existence in general. We must also show why there are exactly 20 men, neither more nor less. For a cause must be assigned for the existence of each individual. Now, this cause cannot be contained in the actual nature of man, for the true definition of man does not involve any consideration of the number 20. Consequently, the cause for the existence of these 20 men, and consequently of each of them, must necessarily be sought externally to each individual. So Spinoza is saying something very important here. He's contradicting from the past what would become and what has become a kind of academic paradigm of eternal comparison between one entity and the other, without ever daring to compare those individual or finite entities to the infinite, to God. I was going to say to the intimate. Anyway, basically what Spinoza is saying is you can't arrive at a logical explanation for the existence of 20 men, let alone 8 billion, right? Like you can't explain the existence of humanity, let alone the existence of life, let alone the existence of Earth before life grew up out of, its crust, whatever your theory is. But what Spinoza is criticizing is not these metaphors and these specific situations that his theories are utilizing to illustrate his points. What he's criticizing is the basis, the assumptions that underlie perspectives about life and about God. And basically he's saying that you can't just eternally compare finite things with one another and then somehow magically produce a system that explains their existence or that justifies it or that even improves it. You have to, at some point, acknowledge some kind of infinite thing. You can't deny God's existence, is what Spinoza is basically saying. Even if you're a pure materialist, well, then God is infinite materiality. God is infinite potentiality, right? It doesn't matter if you're a materialist or an idealist or some kind of other flavor of ist. What Spinoza is trying to say here is that if you take the infinite comparison of things with one another, which again, French theorists have been jacking off to this for fucking 50 years. Derrida, Lacan, all these people. They're like, well, a tree is just a tree because it's not a rock. And a rock is just a rock because it's not a tree. I'm a genius. Well, none of those specific forms could even have existed in the first place if there wasn't a substrate of infinite potentiality that those finite things could, I want to say, grow from or be drawn from. It doesn't matter. Those finite things came out of an infinite substrate. They couldn't even have compared themselves to one another or been compared to one another by us if there wasn't an infinity that produced them in the first place. And I don't know about Derrida and Lacan, but I'm assuming they were atheists, because the French are edgelords. They like to play devil's advocate, which is a weakness I have. And it can sometimes be good, because there are people who pretend to be righteous, and playing devil's advocate can help you, tell those people to fuck off. But you can take that to a detrimental extreme, let's say. Anyway, what Spinoza is trying to say here is that you can't come up with some fantasy explanation. You can't come up with an explanation for there being exactly 20 men or 8 billion without engaging in contradictory thinking, because you have to imagine a sort of cause for that specific number of people. And that cause might be so complex that it can't be defined or it can't be reached, but there must be a cause for that specific number of people to exist. Again, there's a finite number of things. And again, Spinoza is writing in a way that is, he's trying to avoid, I think, confining his argument to his time, because there may have been population censuses at this time. This is a bit of a tangent, but bear with me. If he's using humanity as an example, he might have said, oh, there's 800 million people in the year 1590, It doesn't matter what the number is. What matters is that you can't try to justify that specific number without understanding why each one of those people needed to exist in the first place. So you'd have to have some sort of prescience, some sort of knowledge of like, well, this person needed to exist because of this, and this person needed to exist because of this. Like, they all have separate destinies. And he's saying, again, let's go back a little bit. Spinoza says, this cause cannot be contained in the actual nature of man. For the true definition of man does not involve any consideration of the number 20 or the number 8 billion. There's no specific number of people that are supposed to exist, is what he's saying. And because of that, there's no way to justify or account for the number that do exist. Like, you can't make inferences, pretending to be omnipotent or pretending to be prescient and saying, well, here's why I invented the Georgia Guidestones, and I think I'm so close to God, or I am God, that I'm going to say that arbitrarily there should only be 500 million people on this earth, because that's the ideal number. I'm an idealist. I have an ideal. I have ideas. I'm an ideas man. I think there should only be 500 billion people, and they should practice a form of eugenics that even Plato would cringe at. Yes. That's why I did the Georgia Guidestones. That's why I carved things into stone where they'll last forever. It's a sort of hubris that I think Spinoza is attacking here, and whether he's doing it intentionally or whether his rhetoric is opposing it by virtue of its nature is not for me to judge. But in my 2025 brain, he's saying that's bullshit. You can't apply some arbitrary value of ideal people to existence. You can't play God, basically. And Spinoza, this is a theme that he will continue to espouse. Again, I've read a little further than this. I'm approaching the point where I haven't read beyond this. I'm going to have to do some reading, guys, before I make another video. But basically, again, Spinoza is using logic here to try to oppose a lot of interpretations that were floating around during his time, 400 years ago. I want to say that a lot of those interpretations don't exist now, but they probably do. They've just sort of mutated and the language has kind of changed. So keep your ear out. In any case, Spinoza goes on to say, and I'm rereading things, but we'll get through it. He says, now this cause, the cause for the existence of specifically 20 men, or specifically 8 billion, or 500 billion, right? Pick your number. This cause cannot be contained in the actual nature of man. That's fucking important. He goes, you can't extrapolate an ideal number of people just because you think you understand the nature of man. Let's move on. For the true definition of man does not involve any consideration of the number 20, or 8 billion, or 500 billion, right? Consequently, the cause for the existence of these 20 men, and consequently of each of them, must necessarily be sought externally to each individual. So if you want to, I feel like he's almost trolling at this point. Spinoza's like, well, you want to explain the existence of humanity? You got to explain each individual person, fucker. That's basically what he's saying. I mean, that's why I love this guy, man. He's got serious balls. He's basically saying with archaic language, like the emotion is the same. He's like, oh, you want to explain why there's a certain number of people on Earth? Why don't you explain why there's each individual person? Why does this specific guy need to exist? Why does this woman need to exist? Why does this child? If you're so fucking arrogant that you need to claim to explain why every person is here or why a certain number of people should be here, fuck you. You've got to explain why each individual is here. God damn it, man. It's a wonder this guy wasn't burned at the fucking stake when he said this. Again, let's move on. He says, now this cause cannot be contained. Okay, no, we've gone through that. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Hence, we may lay down the absolute rule that everything which may consist of several individuals must have an external cause. So again, he's saying, just because there's a bunch of humans that have come to exist doesn't mean that God specifically existed to create us. And this is where he sort of, I think, really starts to divert from the orthodoxy of his time, where it's like, well, God exists to create specifically people. And it's like, well, he created a lot of other shit. That's what Spinoza's saying here. And as it has been shown already that existence appertains to the nature of substance, existence must necessarily be included in its definition, and from its definition alone, existence must be deducible. See, to me, this seems to be contradicting his earlier points about, I guess he's not talking about God, he's talking about existence, and existence, by this definition, would be the permutation of infinity into specific forms. So the sort of fallen angel-esque departure of finite things from their constitutive bed of infinity or bed of chaos. So I guess that's, according to his definitions, that seems to hold true. Existence must necessarily be included in its definition. Yes, because things that want to exist as finite, non-similar things would have to have left heaven or left God in order to produce finite things in general. That makes sense according to Spinoza's logic. So, okay, let's keep going. Well, let's just touch on this one point. And from its definition alone, existence must be deducible. Yeah, of course. The definition of existence is distance from God. It's you want it to be an individual thing. You want it to be an ANCAP photon or an ANCAP rock or an ANCAP frog or an ANCAP human being. So you had to leave God to be that individual thing. Because if you were still with God, you'd just be part of God. You'd be an amorphous heavenly glob, right? That tracks with Spinoza's conception of these things. But from its definition, as we have shown, notes 2 and 3, we cannot infer the existence of several substances. Therefore, it follows that there is only one substance of the same nature. Now, again, I think to give Spinoza maximum credit, I'm going to potentially misinterpret what he says here, as I've done in my previous videos. I'm going to interpret the term substance as the term matter, which includes energy. Basically, what Spinoza is trying to say here, lacking any of the tools that we've had and the philosophers that have followed him have had, he's basically saying there can't be two different kinds of matter. Matter can only be one thing, despite the fact that it produces permutations according to the infinite substrate of God. Matter can still only be the same sort of singular medium from which forms of life and non-life bubble up out of. It's the same witch's cauldron of shit. It's the same thing. If there was a second type of matter, and again, this is something that, you know, Spinoza may have not had the tools to figure out, but, you know, if I were to try to contradict this argument, I would talk about dark matter, but dark matter didn't exist, or dark energy at this time. And, you know, maybe dark matter and dark energy and matter are all part of the same substrate. They've just been differentiated by God. Ooh. Who knows? Maybe what we call matter is just a subset of a larger substrate that includes matter, antimatter, and dark energy. Maybe it's all still the same substrate. It's just, again, it's been differentiated. That's why I love Spinoza's argument, man, is if he were confronted with evidence of dark matter and dark energy, what we call that nowadays, he would probably say, well, those are just permutations of God. They're just permutations of infinity. But infinity is the ultimate substrate. God is the ultimate substrate. So if you've perceived some bizarre form of matter and you can't reconcile mathematically why it should exist, that's your problem, bro. Like, you haven't figured out how it fits into my model. That's why this makes for great philosophy, man, because I love every philosopher. If there's ever a contradiction between his work and anything that gets discovered while he's writing it, it's mostly he's. Let's be real. There are a few female philosophers, and good for them, but it's mostly guys. Most philosophers, no matter their gender, will be like, oh, well, that just further proves my point, because that discovery is actually still part of my theory. You know, I don't mean to be cynical or relativistic, but, you know, there are instances of that. Let's try to finish this page here. So we've been going on for a while. So, QED. Spinoza moves on to Proposition 9, where he says, the more reality or being a thing has, the greater the number of its attributes. That's a hell of a claim. That's, to me, my knee-jerk reaction is to think about entropy. It's like, well, the longer something's been around, the more mutations it's accrued, the more its form has been changed by chance, probability, time, entropy, etc. And I guess that would give it more attributes. I mean, let's look at atomic nuclei. Again, I'm trying to be generous to Spinoza. The guy's been dead 400 years. No one's talking about him. No one's making YouTube videos about him. Hey, man. Your ideas are great. Spinoza. That's why I'm making this video. So let's talk about this concept from Proposition 9 in terms of atomic nuclei. So hydrogen was around at the beginning of the universe if you ascribe to any sort of Big Bang type model. Even if you don't, hydrogen's fucking old. Hydrogen's been around forever. Hydrogen is the simplest element on the periodic table. The crazy complex elements that don't last long, like fucking ununoctium, these ones that exist for 0.0001 seconds in a collider and then they decay, they're more complex. They've taken on more attributes, as Spinoza would put it. So basically, Spinoza's saying things that are around longer get more mutated and they become more complicated. So he's equating, conceptually, Spinoza is equating the progression of time and or the application of entropy with increased complexity. So the more complex the thing it is, by this logic, the older it is and the longer it's been around, which is a very potentially like Lovecraftian thing. It's very creepy. It's like if you have this elder, ancient, mutable glob of biomass, you know, it has to have been around for 3 billion years to achieve that level of complexity. That's what he's arguing. Creepy shit. Again, I'm being anachronistic. I'm applying modern day examples to this argument, but the argument is the argument. It's saying the same thing. The metaphorical or, you know, imagistic examples I'm offering are moot. They're a product of the time I'm running my mouth in. So Spinoza moves on very quickly to Proposition 10. He has no proofs for Proposition 9, but I don't think he needs them. I think Proposition 9 is pretty goddamn tight. So Proposition 10. Each particular attribute of the one substance must be conceived through itself. Now this is where, oh my God, he's opened up a fucking Pandora's box of complexity. So in my previous videos, I've talked about like visualizing the difference between two objects, like two blades of grass. What Spinoza is pointing to here is that if you cloned a blade of grass that was raised in a hyperbaric chamber, and you planted that blade of grass outside of the lab that it was cloned in, what Spinoza is saying here is that every single way that reality could potentially influence that perfect clone would have to be understood in and of itself in order to understand its effect on the cloned piece of grass. So in other words, if you had two people and you had two facsimiles of the same city, you know, two of me, you had two madmen, right? You raised one of them in one city and one of them in another, and the cities were supposed to be identical. There would still be factors of influence, of chaos, of outside forces that would make minute changes to the DNA of those people, even if like twins, right? That's the biggest example I can think of to contradict Spinoza's argument is, oh, well, there's twins who use the same toothpaste. And it's like, yeah, but analyze their DNA. It's going to be different. They're not going to be the same. Again, it goes back to Spinoza's argument. There can never be two things, ever, that are exactly the same. And I think that's true. So again, part 10, I think in a way or Proposition 10, excuse me, I think Spinoza is trying to further reinforce his argument. But he has a proof for Proposition 10. We're going to go through that, and then I'm going to end the video, and we'll come back to things later on. So, the proof for Proposition 10. An attribute is that which the intellect perceives of as substance, as constituting its essence, and therefore must be conceived through itself. So Spinoza is essentially saying that the forces of entropy, of change, of time, are like God in that they can't be dissected like an object or a being or a creature. They just are. Like, you can't, you could maybe disobey time. You could maybe make a time machine, but you can't figure out what time is beyond your experience of it as a human agent, right? That's what Spinoza is saying. And he's saying it in the context of all these forces acting on specific objects or specific configurations of matter or of energy. He's saying if you have a thing that you're looking at that's being affected by time, by entropy, by mutation, radiation, all these different things, you can't look at these forces and somehow try to break the forces themselves down like you might be able to break down an atom into quarks. Like, you can't do that. These forces seem to be what we call now fundamental or immutable. They're sort of emanations of God. They're emanations of infinity that are very difficult to break down. Again, we can discern how they behave when they interact with matter, but we can't actually take the actual force, the actual thing, and go like, you know, what is time? Like, why does time go the way it does? Why does it do what it does? There's no Marvel Universe chronotons, not yet. So that's what Spinoza is trying to say. He's saying if you can't dissect these forces, basically he's saying you have to assume that they're immutable because you can't apply logical dissection to them, even in a world where he lacked any microscopes or electron microscopes. He's basically saying there are certain forces that are, or that seem to be constitutive of reality. They seem to be emanations of the fundamental infinite, aka God, and you can only conceive of them through themselves, like you can only conceive of God through itself. That there has to be a fundamental infinity that nourishes all subsequent lesser infinities and all examples of finite matter. So essentially that's what he's saying with this proof for proposition 10. And the proof goes on, guys. It goes on for half a page. So I'm going to end this video here. Thank you for watching and listening to this. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to keep soldiering on through Spinoza because I find him fascinating. And it's nice that even a few of you are even just using this to fall asleep. Then that just means I'm incepting you with my ideas while you're in a pseudo-unconscious state. So, enjoy. Anyway, I do hope you're doing well in your life. Do what you can to keep yourself healthy and buy Bitcoin. That having been said, I'll see you guys soon. Peace out.